The crystal glass felt unnervingly heavy in Ethan's hand. It was Waterford, a wedding gift from his in-laws, and like everything else in the Thorne family mansion, it was meant to signify a certain weight, a value he was constantly reminded he did not personally possess. Across the polished mahogany expanse of the dining table, his wife Amelia laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound, like ice cracking in a tumbler. Her father, Marcus Thorne, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a sneer of smug satisfaction, had just finished a story about a business rival's spectacular failure. The story's moral, as always, was simple. The world was divided into predators and prey, and the Thornes were apex predators. The man just didn't have the stomach for it, Marcus concluded, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. He then turned his gaze, cold and appraising, onto Ethan. It's a quality you can't buy, you can't learn. You either have it or you don't. The implication hung in the air, thick and cloying as the scent of the overpriced floral arrangement in the center of the table. Amelia, sensing the familiar shift in her father's attention, placed a proprietary hand on Ethan's arm. Her touch was not affectionate. It was a gesture of ownership, like a queen steadying a decorative but ultimately useless scepter. "Oh, Daddy, don't tease," she said, her voice laced with a patronizing sweetness that was far more insulting than her father's open contempt. "Ethan tries his best. His little architectural projects are very quaint." Ethan said nothing. He simply met his father-in-law's gaze with a calm, unreadable placidity that he knew drove the older man to distraction. He had spent 5 years mastering that look. It was his only shield in this house, a fortress of quiet dignity against a relentless siege of condescension. He could feel the familiar burn of humiliation, a slow, hot tide rising in his chest. But on the outside, he was a placid lake. They saw a lack of ambition, a placid emptiness. They had no idea of the depths beneath. They had no idea that tonight the dam was finally set to break. What they didn't know was that the quiet architect they mocked was the architect of their imminent downfall. Within the hour, their entire world, built on a foundation of arrogance and dismissiveness, would be condemned. It's funny how a story can change everything, isn't it? How one moment can reframe years of your life. We all have moments we wish we could take back, and moments we wish we could live in forever. And sometimes there are moments that give us the justice we've been waiting for. I hope this story finds you well, wherever you are in the world. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy what you're about to see, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of karma and consequence. Now let's get back to that dinner and see how it all began. To understand the profound, earth-shattering satisfaction of that evening, you have to understand the 5 years of quiet erosion that preceded it. It hadn't always been this way. When Ethan first met Amelia, he was captivated not by her wealth, which he knew of but cared little for, but by her fire. She was fiercely intelligent, driven, with a passion for modern design that mirrored his own for classical architectural principles. They met at a gallery opening, arguing playfully over the merits of a brutalist sculpture. He saw a partner, an equal, a woman whose sharp edges could sharpen his own. She, in turn, seemed to see in his calm demeanor a steadying force, a quiet harbor from the relentless pressure of her family's expectations. Their early courtship was a whirlwind of shared passions. They spent weekends exploring forgotten neighborhoods, Ethan pointing out the structural bones of old buildings, Amelia imagining how she could breathe new life into their interiors. He was a promising young architect at a prestigious firm, and she was launching her own boutique interior design company. They were a power couple in the making, or so he thought. The first crack appeared not as a fissure, but as a hairline fracture, almost invisible. It was when he met her parents, Marcus and Eleanor Thorne, for the first time. The dinner was at this very table, in this very room. Marcus had sized him up with the same predatory gaze he used on business competitors. He peppered Ethan with questions, not about his life or his passions, but about his pedigree, his school, his parents' professions, a professor and a librarian, his financial portfolio. Ethan answered honestly, without shame. He came from a family that valued knowledge and integrity over net worth. He could see the dismissal crystallizing in Marcus's eyes. He wasn't a predator. He was, in the Thorne family taxonomy, prey, or worse, irrelevant. Eleanor, Amelia's mother, was a different study in disappointment. She was a woman sculpted by wealth, her posture perfect, her smile a carefully maintained mask. She said little, but her silence was an endorsement of her husband's judgment. She would watch Marcus's casual cruelties with a detached placidity, never intervening, never offering a word of support. She was the silent, smiling enabler, her inaction a quiet poison that was, in many ways, more damaging than Marcus's open hostility. Amelia had defended him then. "Daddy, stop it," she'd said, a genuine flash of anger in her eyes. "I love him." But even then, Ethan noticed something troubling. She defended him not by validating his worth, but by claiming him as her possession. "I love him. I chose him." As if he were an unconventional piece of art she had the right to display, and they should respect her taste, if not the art itself. After that dinner, things began to change. Amelia's ambition, once a fire that warmed him, began to feel like a scorching heat. She grew more and more obsessed with the world her father inhabited, a world of hostile takeovers, extravagant displays of power, and public status. She left the world of art galleries behind for charity galas and exclusive country clubs. Her conversations shifted from the beauty of a perfect arch to the market value of a penthouse apartment. And slowly, her perception of Ethan began to align with her father's. He had made a pivotal decision 2 years into their marriage. He left a large, prestigious firm to start his own practice. To Amelia, this was a catastrophic step down. "You had a clear path, Ethan," she'd argued, her voice tight with frustration. "A partnership was in your future. Now you're starting from scratch? It's embarrassing." He tried to explain his vision. He didn't want to build sterile glass towers that were monuments to corporate ego. He wanted to design spaces with soul. Libraries, community centers, homes that felt like sanctuaries. He wanted his work to have meaning. She heard only one thing. He was choosing a smaller life, a less profitable life, a life that would not produce the kind of wealth that registered on her father's scale. So Ethan made another decision, a secret one. He would build his dream, but he would do it in the shadows. He used the inheritance from his grandfather, a surprisingly vast sum left by a man who lived modestly but invested wisely, to found 2 companies. The first was Ethan Croft Architects, the small, public-facing firm that Amelia found so quaint. It took on the small, meaningful projects he was passionate about, barely breaking even. The second was a silent, anonymous holding company he named Aethelred Holdings, a nod to an Old English king known for being underestimated. Through Aethelred, he began to invest. He bought land. He funded developments. He partnered with other architects under non-disclosure agreements, his designs winning awards that were credited to other firms. He built a fortune that dwarfed the Thorne family's wealth, all while playing the part of the struggling, idealistic artist at home. The deception was a heavy weight, but it was the only way he could be the man he wanted to be without facing Amelia's constant, withering disapproval. He told himself it was temporary, a way to build a foundation strong enough to withstand her family's judgment. He just never imagined the foundation he was building would one day have to support the rubble of his own marriage. The years that followed were a masterclass in humiliation, each lesson more painful than the last. The world saw Amelia Croft as a brilliant success story, her interior design firm lauded in glossy magazines. Her success was inextricably linked to her father's empire. Marcus Thorne would acquire a new commercial property, and Amelia's firm would be contracted to design the interiors. It was a perfect, self-sustaining ecosystem of nepotism, dressed up as market synergy. Ethan's own small firm, by contrast, was a source of constant, low-grade shame for her. It was a prop she used to demonstrate her own tolerance and magnanimity. One particularly galling incident took place at a summer gala for the city's real estate elite. It was held at a newly opened hotel, a soulless glass box that Marcus had developed. Ethan hated these events. They were a parade of peacocks, men and women displaying their plumage of wealth and power. He stood by Amelia's side, a quiet shadow in a well-tailored but unremarkable suit. Amelia was in her element, flitting from group to group, her laughter echoing off the marble floors. She was talking to a small circle of her friends, women with the same hard, polished look as her. One of them, a notoriously catty socialite named Beatrice, turned to Ethan. "And what about you, Ethan?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Still designing those charming little birdhouses?" The other women tittered. Before Ethan could even form a response, Amelia jumped in, patting his chest with that same gesture of ownership. "Be nice, Bea," she said, smiling. "Someone has to design the spaces for the little people. Not everyone can handle a portfolio like my father's." She looked at Ethan, her smile unwavering, but her eyes were cold. "He keeps the world beautiful on a small scale. It's his art." The word art was delivered as if it were a synonym for hobby. It was a public castration, performed with a smile and a champagne flute. The men in the circle smirked. They understood the code. Ethan was not a player. He was an accessory. He felt the familiar heat rise in his cheeks, but his expression remained a mask of polite neutrality. He simply inclined his head. "Something like that," he said, his voice even. Inside, a storm was raging. He wanted to tell them that the quaint community library he'd just completed had won a National Design Award, an award he'd accepted under a pseudonym to avoid this very kind of scrutiny. He wanted to explain that the structural engineering principles he'd pioneered in that little project were now being studied in universities. He wanted to grab Amelia's arm and tell her that the small scale was a choice, not a limitation. But he did nothing. It was not the time. The chess game was still in its opening moves. To reveal his queen now would be a foolish, emotional blunder. So he endured it, adding the memory to a growing mental ledger, a list of grievances that was becoming terrifyingly long. Later that night, as they were being driven home in the back of a black town car, Amelia was buzzing from the social triumph of the evening. "Did you see the way Mr. Abernathy was talking to Daddy? They're planning something huge, a new tower on the waterfront." She sighed, leaning her head back against the leather. "God, it's just so exciting to be a part of it all." She then turned to him, her mood shifting. "You were so quiet tonight, Ethan. You really need to learn to network. You could have made some valuable connections. My friends were asking what you do, and it's awkward." "I thought you explained it perfectly," he said, his voice quiet. "I design birdhouses for the little people." She missed the icy fury in his tone completely. "Don't be sensitive," she snapped, her patience gone. "I was helping you. I was framing your work in a way they could understand. You should be grateful." He looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. Grateful. The word hung between them, a monument to the vast, unbridgeable canyon that had opened up in their marriage. He was not her partner. He was her project, her charity case. And the weight of her charity was becoming unbearable. That night he lay awake long after she had fallen asleep, the echo of her friend's laughter ringing in his ears. He made a silent promise to himself. One day, they would not be laughing. One day, the man who designed small, beautiful things would show them all just how large his world truly was. The conflict over finances was the next logical battlefield. For Amelia, money was not just a tool, it was a language, the primary way she understood and assigned value to the world, and to people. In her eyes, Ethan's financial contribution to their marriage was negligible. a fact she never tired of reminding him of, both implicitly and, with increasing frequency, explicitly. Their finances were a stark representation of their power dynamic. She had her accounts, fed by her successful firm, and generous infusions from her father. He had his, which to her seemed to perpetually hover near empty. And then there was the joint account, the one from which the mortgage on their fashionable downtown apartment was paid, along with the bills for their extravagant lifestyle. Amelia was the primary contributor to this account, a fact that gave her absolute authority over it. The confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Ethan was in his home study, sketching a preliminary design for a low-income housing initiative he was consulting on for free, when Amelia walked in, a tablet in her hand. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. In her mind, it was her study, her apartment. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her tone clipped and businesslike. She swiped a finger across the screen, a graph of their monthly expenses glowing in the dim light. "This is not sustainable." He put his pencil down, turning to face her. "What's not sustainable?" "Us. This. Your situation." She gestured vaguely at his drawing table. "I just transferred another $50,000 into the joint account to cover the mortgage and the club dues. That's the third time this year. The amount you contribute barely covers the utilities." He remained silent, letting her speak. He knew this speech by heart. It was a quarterly performance. "I work incredibly hard, Ethan," she continued, her voice rising with practiced indignation. "My father works hard. We build things. We generate wealth. And that wealth is what pays for this apartment, for the clothes you wear, for the food we eat. What are you contributing? A few $1,000s here and there from designing someone's deck?" The insult, as always, was designed to be both dismissive and emasculating. He thought of the seven-figure sum that had been transferred into Ethelred Holdings' primary account just yesterday, the first major dividend from a commercial real estate project he had secretly financed in another state. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He could end this conversation with a single sentence. He could show her a bank statement that would make her head spin. But the game was not over. The final pieces were not yet in place. "I'm sorry it's a burden, Amelia," he said, his voice measured and calm. This was the response she expected, an apology, an acknowledgement of his dependence. "It's not about it being a burden," she snapped, though it was entirely about it being a burden. "It's about respect. It's about partnership. I feel like I am carrying you. I am a successful woman, and I am married to a man who is essentially my dependent. Do you have any idea how that feels? How it looks?" He knew exactly how it looked. It looked just the way she and her father had designed it to look. "I have a payment coming in from the Bayshore project at the end of the month," he said, offering up the name of one of his small, legitimate projects. "I can contribute more then." She sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of martyrdom. "Fine. Just try to be more aware of the expenses, Ethan. This lifestyle doesn't pay for itself. Try to think bigger, for my sake, if not for your own." She turned and left, the tablet still glowing in her hand, a digital scepter of her authority. Ethan sat there for a long time after she was gone, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He felt a profound sense of loneliness. The deception, once a shield, was beginning to feel like a cage of his own making. He picked up his phone and opened a secure banking app. With a few taps, he initiated a transfer of $20,000 from one of Ethelred's ancillary accounts to the personal account Amelia knew about. It was a carefully calculated amount, large enough to be a significant contribution from the struggling architect, but not so large as to arouse suspicion. He watched the confirmation screen appear. The money would appear in his account by morning. He would then transfer it to the joint account, and Amelia would be temporarily placated. She would see it as a sign that he was trying. She would see it as her lecture having had the desired effect. She would not see it for what it was, A small, strategic disbursement from a king to a courtier who believed herself to be queen. The cost of maintaining his cover was no longer just emotional. It was becoming a bitter, transactional ritual of humiliation, and he was growing very, very tired of paying it. The catalyst for the final act arrived, as most things did in their lives, in the form of Marcus Thorne's booming voice. It was a Sunday brunch at the Thorne Mansion, an obligatory weekly ritual of fealty. The air was thick with the smell of hollandaise and self-congratulation. Marcus was holding court at the head of the long dining table, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face flushed with triumph. "The ink is officially dry," he announced, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who had just conquered a small country. As of yesterday, Thorne Industries has secured a 20-year lease for the top 10 floors of the Argent Tower. We're moving the global headquarters. A polite ripple of applause went around the table. Eleanor smiled her placid, approving smile. Amelia, however, was beaming, her face alight with a visceral excitement. The Argent Tower was more than just a building. It was a statement. A sleek, silver spire of glass and steel. It was the most prestigious new commercial address in the city. For Thorne Industries to occupy the penthouse floors was a definitive declaration of their dominance. And, Marcus continued, his eyes finding Amelia's, as the anchor tenant, I was able to negotiate a very favorable lease for another, smaller firm. A certain up-and-coming interior design company will be taking the entire third floor. Amelia gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in a gesture of faux surprise that fooled no one. "Oh, Daddy, you didn't." "I did," he said, basking in her adoration. "Amelia Croft Interiors will have the showpiece space it deserves." This was the culmination of Amelia's dreams. An office in the Argent Tower would catapult her firm into a new league. It was the ultimate status symbol, a physical manifestation of her success, gifted to her by her powerful father. She looked across the table at Ethan, her eyes shining. It was not a look of shared joy, it was a look of pity. A look that said, "See, this is the world I live in, a world you can only visit." Marcus, never one to miss an opportunity to drive a point home, turned his attention to his son-in-law. "What do you think of that, Ethan?" he asked, a cruel twinkle in his eye. "The Argent. Quite a piece of architecture, isn't it? A bit out of your league, I imagine. No quaint cottages there." Ethan had studied the plans for the Argent Tower extensively. It was a technically brilliant but aesthetically cold building. He knew its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. He also knew something that no one else at this table did. He knew that the building's original developer had overextended themselves and that the entire property had been quietly on the block for the past 6 months, sold not as a whole, but through a complex and discreet transfer of the ownership shares of the parent LLC that held the title. "It's an impressive structure, Marcus," Ethan said, his voice even and calm. "A bold statement." "Bold is right," Marcus boomed. "It takes guts to play at this level. You have to be willing to risk it all. That's how real men build legacies, Ethan. Not with sketches of cottages and community centers." He took a large gulp of champagne. "It's about power, owning the sky." Amelia laughed, intoxicated by the moment. "Don't worry, darling," she said to Ethan, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "I'll be sure to save you a guest pass so you can come visit my new office. You can see what a real workspace looks like." The table chuckled. The humiliation was complete, a perfect, multi-layered assault. His work was belittled, his manhood questioned, and his status as an outsider ruthlessly confirmed. He was being offered a guest pass to his wife's success. He felt the eyes of the entire Thorne family on him, waiting for him to shrink, to stammer, to show some sign of defeat. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his orange juice. He met Marcus's smug gaze, and he smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile. In his mind, he was not in a dining room. He was in his real office. the minimalist, high-tech sanctuary no one knew about. He was on a video call with his lead attorney, the discreet and formidable Mr. Chen. And on the screen between them was the final share transfer agreement for Argent Tower LLC. The signature line at the bottom read, Ethelred Holdings. Marcus Thorne thought he was leasing the sky. He had no idea he was just renting it, and the landlord was the quiet man sitting at the other end of his table, the man he had just dismissed as a builder of cottages. The game was no longer in its opening moves. The final, decisive checkmate was now in sight. All Ethan had to do was wait for the perfect moment to declare it. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet preparation. While Amelia was consumed with designing her new showpiece office, and Marcus was boasting to the financial press about his company's new headquarters, Ethan was moving his own, far larger pieces across the board. The public face of Ethan Croft Architects continued its work. He met with the board of the public library, finalizing the plans for a new children's wing. He visited the construction site of a small, sustainable housing project he was building pro bono. These were the things that gave him genuine satisfaction, the work that fed his soul. They were also the perfect camouflage. His real work took place in the early hours of the morning or late at night, in the sleek, hidden office that was the true heart of his operations. It was a space that reflected his true self, minimalist, efficient, and powerful. There was no clutter, only clean lines, cutting-edge technology, and a single vast window overlooking the city. It was from here that he managed the sprawling portfolio of Ethelred Holdings. "The final transfer is complete, Mr. Croft," said the voice of Mr. Chen, his attorney, through a secure video link. Mr. Chen was a man as precise and understated as Ethan's own architectural designs. He was older, with a placid, grandfatherly face that concealed a mind like a steel trap. He was the only person in the world who knew both sides of Ethan's life. Ethelred Holdings is now the sole and uncontested owner of Argent Tower LLC. You own the building, the land it sits on, and all associated lease agreements. Ethan looked at the digital document on the screen. It was a simple list of tenants. Near the top was Thorne Industries, floors 40 to 50, and further down, Amelia Croft Interiors, floor 3. It was all there. The stage for their arrogance was now his property. "And the lease agreements?" Ethan asked. "Are they as ironclad as Marcus believes?" A rare, thin smile touched Mr. Chen's lips. "The lease for Thorne Industries is standard, but the one Mr. Thorne negotiated for his daughter's firm is problematic. He was so focused on getting her a below-market rate that he overlooked several clauses in the standard tenant agreement we acquired from the previous owners. Specifically, paragraph 11, section B. The morals clause," Ethan said. He remembered reading it. It was an archaic, usually unenforceable piece of boilerplate. "Precisely," Mr. Chen confirmed. "It gives the landlord broad discretion to terminate a lease in the event of conduct that brings the building or its ownership into disrepute. It's rarely invoked, of course, but disrepute is a wonderfully subjective term. In the hands of a creative legal team, it could be interpreted to mean, well, almost anything." Ethan felt a cold, hard knot of certainty form in his stomach. This was the tool, the mechanism of consequence. It wasn't just about the money or the ownership. It was about the elegant, inescapable logic of their downfall. They would be undone not by an outside force, but by their own arrogance, by the very document Marcus had so proudly secured. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," Ethan said. "Please have the physical deed and a summary of the ownership transfer delivered to my home office. A simple manila envelope will be fine." "It will be done, Mr. Croft. Will you be needing anything else?" Ethan thought for a moment, looking out at the city skyline. "Yes," he said. "Please have your team prepare 2 documents. The first, a notice of lease termination for Amelia Croft Interiors, citing paragraph 11, section B. The second, a notice of lease renegotiation for Thorne Industries, effective immediately, raising their rent to 3 times the current market rate. Have them ready. I will let you know when to serve them. Understood, Mr. Chen said, his face impassive. Is there anything else? Yes, Ethan said, his voice quiet. Clear your schedule for Sunday evening. I may need you to make a house call. After the call ended, Ethan leaned back in his chair. He felt no glee, no thrill of impending victory. Instead, he felt a profound and heavy sadness. He was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of his own life. There would be collateral damage. But the alternative, to continue to live as a ghost in his own marriage, to have his worth measured and found wanting every single day, was no longer an option. The quiet man had to find his voice. The day of the dinner, a courier delivered a plain 9x12 manila envelope. Ethan took it and placed it on his desk. Inside was the deed to the Argent Tower, a document that represented a value far beyond the paper it was printed on. It was proof. It was power. It was the final, devastating word in a 5-year-long argument. He picked it up. It felt no heavier than a stack of his architectural drawings. It felt like justice. That evening, as he put on his suit for the dinner at the Thorne Mansion, he slipped the envelope into his leather briefcase. He felt strangely calm, the quiet that comes not before the storm, but in its very eye. And so we returned to the dining room, to the heavy crystal glass and the suffocating scent of lilies. The main course had been cleared, and dessert, a pretentious, deconstructed tiramisu, had been served. The conversation, lubricated by expensive wine, had turned, as it inevitably did, to Ethan's future, or rather, his lack thereof. Marcus, emboldened by his second glass of port, leaned forward, assuming a paternal tone that was more insulting than his usual aggression. Ethan, son, we need to have a serious talk about your prospects. Ethan placed his fork down and gave his father-in-law his full attention. Oh? This little architecture hobby of yours, it's all well and good, but it's not providing for my daughter in the way she deserves, Marcus said, completely oblivious to the fact that Amelia's firm was, until recently, far less profitable than Ethan's hobby. You're a smart lad, in your own way. You just lack killer instinct. But you're family, and I take care of family. Amelia looked on, nodding in encouragement. This was her father's attempt at generosity, and she wanted Ethan to receive it with the appropriate gratitude. I've been thinking, Marcus continued, I could create a position for you at Thorne Industries. Nothing too demanding. Assistant project manager, perhaps. You could review blueprints, check specifications. It would give you a steady paycheck, a respectable title. It's time you became a part of the real world, son. The offer hung in the air. A menial job, a pity position, a way for Marcus to finally and completely domesticate the strange, quiet creature his daughter had brought home. It was the ultimate assertion of his dominance. He wasn't just offering Ethan a job, he was offering to own him, body and soul. Ethan looked from Marcus's smug face to his wife's expectant one. Amelia's expression was a complex mixture of hope and embarrassment. She desperately wanted him to accept, to finally fall in line and become the man she could present to her world without apology. Thank you, Marcus, Ethan said, his voice unnervingly polite. That's a very generous offer, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. A flicker of annoyance crossed Marcus's face. Don't be a fool, Ethan. This is a lifeline. It was then that Amelia spoke, her patience finally snapping. The carefully constructed facade of the supportive wife crumbled, revealing the raw contempt beneath. She let out a sharp, exasperated sigh. Oh, for God's sake, Ethan, stop being so proud, she said, her voice rising. He's trying to help you. Don't you get it? You have nothing. Your little firm makes pennies. This apartment, our vacations, the car you drive, it's all paid for by me and my father. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. She gestured around the opulent room, her hands sweeping across the expensive art, the antique furniture, the view of the city lights beyond the windows. This, this is my life, a life I have generously shared with you, she declared, her voice trembling with a righteous fury that had been simmering for years. You walk around with your quiet dignity and your noble little projects, but what does it amount to? Nothing. You are a passenger in my life. She took a step toward him, her eyes blazing, and then she delivered the fatal line, the words that would echo in the ensuing silence like a gunshot. Be realistic, darling. You'd be homeless without me. Without my family, you would be on the street. Everything you have is because of us. The room fell utterly silent. Even Marcus seemed taken aback by the sheer venom in his daughter's voice. Eleanor Thorne froze, a piece of dessert halfway to her lips, her eyes wide. This was it, the absolute nadir, the lowest point of a 5-year descent. Ethan did not flinch. He did not look away. He simply held her gaze. The burn of humiliation he had felt for so long was gone, replaced by a profound, icy clarity. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. She had not only said the words, she believed them. In her mind, he was less than nothing. A parasite. He slowly, deliberately took a sip of water. He placed the glass down on the table with a soft, definitive click. The sound was deafening in the silence. He looked at his wife, the woman he had once loved, and saw a stranger. "Is that what you truly believe, Amelia?" he asked, his voice so quiet it seemed to draw all the sound from the room. "It's not what I believe," she retorted, crossing her arms. "It's the truth." "I see," he said. He reached down beside his chair and lifted his leather briefcase, placing it on the table. He opened it and took out the plain manila envelope, the symbolic object, the final word. "Then I think it's time we had a discussion about the nature of truth." The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The oppressive weight of the Thorns' dominance had vanished, replaced by a new, unfamiliar tension. It was the electric hum of a power surge, the feeling of a magnetic pole reversal. Ethan's calm was no longer the calm of a placid lake. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. Amelia, Marcus, and Eleanor watched him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and irritation, as he laid the manila envelope on the polished table between them. "What is that?" Amelia asked, her voice still sharp, though a sliver of uncertainty had crept into it. "More of your little drawings?" "No," Ethan said softly. He didn't open the envelope yet. The anticipation was part of the process. This was a demolition, and it had to be done with architectural precision. First, you expose the faulty foundations. This is a conversation piece. But before we get to it, I want to address your statement, the one about me being homeless without you. He paused, letting the words hang in the air again. It's an interesting turn of phrase, homeless. It implies a lack of ownership, a fundamental dependency. For 5 years, you and your father have worked very hard to reinforce that idea. You, with your constant reminders of who pays the bills, and you, Marcus, with your endless dismissals of my profession. Marcus scoffed. "I just call it like I see it, son." "Precisely," Ethan agreed, his tone dangerously pleasant. "You call it like you see it. The problem is, you haven't been seeing things clearly for a very long time. You see a struggling architect, a man of no consequence. You see what you want to see." He finally slid a finger under the flap of the envelope and pulled out a single, thick sheaf of papers, bound with a simple staple. He placed it in the center of the table. The top page was a title sheet, printed in a simple, bold font. It read, "Deed of Ownership, Argent Tower, LLC." Marcus squinted at it from across the table. "The Argent Tower? What is this, some kind of joke? Are you trying to pass off a blueprint as a deed?" "It's no joke, Marcus," Ethan said. He slid the document across the table toward his father-in-law. "Please, have a look. You're familiar with real estate documents. I'm sure you'll find it all in order." Marcus picked up the document with a huff of annoyance. He scanned the first page, his expression of contempt slowly beginning to curdle into confusion. He flipped to the second page, then the third. His eyes, which were usually darting and predatory, became fixed, wide. His face began to lose its ruddy color. This is impossible, he stammered, his voice a dry rasp. This says the sole owner of Argent Tower LLC is a company called Ethelred Holdings. That's correct, Ethan affirmed. What does this have to do with you? Amelia demanded, her patience gone. Are you trying to say you know these people? Did you do some work for them? Ethan turned his gaze to his wife. The moment had arrived. The quiet bomb. He delivered the line without inflection, a simple statement of fact that would change everything. I don't know them, Amelia, he said. I am them. I am the sole proprietor of Ethelred Holdings. Silence. A profound, echoing void. Amelia stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, her mind refusing to process the words. Eleanor's manicured hand flew to her throat. Marcus looked up from the deed, his face a mask of disbelief. You're lying, Marcus whispered, the word devoid of its usual force. Am I? Ethan asked calmly. He reached into the envelope again and pulled out a second document. This might help. These are the Articles of Incorporation for Ethelred Holdings, filed 6 years ago. You'll find my name, Ethan Croft, listed as the founder and chairman. I believe your legal team is quite familiar with verifying such documents. He slid the second document across the table. It landed softly next to Marcus's trembling hand. Amelia finally found her voice. It was thin and reedy. What does this mean? Ethan looked at her, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of pity. She looked so small, so lost. The entire universe she had built around her own perceived superiority was imploding. It means, Amelia, he said, his voice gentle but firm, that the stunning new office your father so generously negotiated for you is in my building. It means that the prestigious new global headquarters for Thorn Industries is in my building. It means that for the next 20 years, your father's company will be paying rent to me. He let that sink in. He could see the calculations firing behind Amelia's eyes, the frantic reordering of her reality. The man she called a parasite, a dependent, the man she believed would be homeless without her, was her landlord. He was her father's landlord. The power dynamic of their entire world had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic event. So you see, Ethan concluded, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper, the truth is, I'm not the one who should be worried about being homeless. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was not the explosion of rage Ethan had anticipated. Instead, a chilling, unnatural silence descended upon the room, the kind that follows a lightning strike before the thunderclap. Marcus Thorn, a man whose entire identity was built on bluster and control, simply stared at the documents on the table as if they were written in a dead language he couldn't comprehend. His face was pale, his lips moving silently. Amelia was the first to break. It wasn't with a scream, but with a short, sharp, disbelieving laugh. No, she said, shaking her head. No, this is a trick, a very elaborate, very cruel trick. She turned to Ethan, her eyes pleading for him to admit it was all a performance. Ethan, stop this. This isn't funny. I assure you, I am not laughing, Ethan replied, his voice devoid of emotion. It was then that Marcus's system finally rebooted, bypassing denial and going straight to fury. He slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. I'll sue you! I'll sue you into oblivion! This is fraud! Corporate espionage! He roared, his face turning a blotchy, apoplectic red. You seduced my daughter to get access to my business. I'll ruin you. I'll have you disbarred, or whatever it is they do to little architects. You'll do nothing of the sort, Ethan said calmly. Every transaction was legal, ethical, and conducted at arm's length through a third party. The previous owners of the Argent Tower were simply looking for a quiet buyer with deep liquidity to avoid a public fire sale. I happened to be that buyer. You, on the other hand, signed a lease agreement without performing adequate due diligence on the building's ultimate ownership. That's not fraud, Marcus. That's just a bad business decision. As if on cue, the grand doorbell of the mansion chimed, its melodic tones sounding like a funeral bell in the tense atmosphere. A uniformed maid appeared at the dining room entrance, looking flustered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Thorne," she stammered, looking at Eleanor, "but there is a Mr. Chen here to see Mr. Croft. He says it's urgent." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, Maria. Please show him in." A moment later, Mr. Chen entered the room. He was the physical embodiment of calm competence, his dark suit immaculate, his expression serene. He carried a slim leather briefcase. Behind him stood two younger associates, both with the same air of quiet professionalism. The unexpected ally had arrived, right on schedule. "Mr. Croft," Mr. Chen said with a slight bow, "I trust I'm not interrupting." "You're right on time, Mr. Chen," Ethan said. "Amelia, Marcus, Eleanor, this is my personal attorney and the lead counsel for Ethelred Holdings, Mr. David Chen." The sight of the legal team was the final confirmation. This was real. This was happening. Amelia's face crumpled. The rage and denial evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, desperate panic. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't do this." Mr. Chen, ignoring her, opened his briefcase and produced two sealed envelopes. "As per your instructions, Mr. Croft," he said, placing one envelope in front of Amelia and the other in front of Marcus. "What are these?" Marcus growled, eyeing the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "The first," Mr. Chen explained, gesturing toward Amelia's envelope, "is a formal notice of lease termination for the tenant, Amelia Croft Interiors. The termination is effective in 30 days, as per the remedies afforded to the landlord under paragraph 11, section B of the executed lease agreement." "Paragraph 11, the morals clause?" Amelia choked out, remembering Ethan's words from moments before. What disrepute?" Ethan answered for her. His voice was cold, precise. He began to recite the list of grievances. "For 5 years, the principal of Amelia Croft Interiors, both in private and in public, has engaged in a pattern of behavior designed to humiliate and degrade a business associate, in this case, me. At the Astor Gala, you referred to my work as designing birdhouses. At countless dinners, you've called my business a hobby. And just 10 minutes ago, in this room, you publicly declared that I was a financial dependent on the verge of homelessness. Your contempt for me, Amelia, is also contempt for the chairman of the company that owns your building. I would call that bringing the ownership into disrepute, wouldn't you, Mr. Chen?" "It is a creative but legally sound interpretation, Mr. Croft," Chen confirmed, his face impassive. Ethan then turned to Marcus, who was staring at his own envelope with dread. "And that," Ethan said, "is a notice of lease renegotiation for Thorne Industries. As the new ownership, we are exercising our right to adjust rental rates to reflect current market realities. Your new monthly lease payment will be triple the current rate, effective the 1st of next month. Failure to accept the new terms will be considered a breach of contract, and eviction proceedings will begin immediately." The room fell silent once more. It was a perfect, inescapable trap, built not with malice, but with the cold, hard logic of their own actions. Marcus Thorne, the great predator, was caught in a snare of his own making. Amelia, the queen of appearances, was about to be evicted from her own castle. Finally, Ethan turned his attention to the silent enabler. Eleanor had not moved, her face a pale, frozen mask. "And you, Eleanor," he said, his voice softening with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. "For 5 years you sat at this table and watched. You heard every insult, you saw every humiliation, And you never said a word. You never once defended the man your daughter chose to marry. You chose your comfortable silence over basic human decency. I wonder, was it worth it? Eleanor flinched as if struck. A single tear traced a path down her perfectly powdered cheek. It was the first genuine emotion Ethan had seen from her in 5 years. But it was far, far too late. The demolition was complete. All that was left was to watch the structures fall. The weeks that followed the dinner were a slow, agonizing unraveling for the Thorne family. The story of what happened that night and the subsequent fallout spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire, whispered in country clubs and boardrooms. The narrative was irresistible. Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, had been outmaneuvered and financially crippled by his own quiet, unassuming son-in-law. It was a humiliation from which his reputation would never fully recover. Ethan, true to his word, was relentless but not cruel. He proceeded with the cold, dispassionate logic of a force of nature. He filed for divorce from Amelia the day after the dinner, citing irreconcilable differences. The proceedings were swift and uncomplicated. Given his meticulously documented hidden wealth and Amelia's blatant financial deception and emotional cruelty, her attempts to claim a significant portion of his assets were summarily dismissed by the courts. She was left with her own firm's assets, which were now essentially worthless. Her lease was terminated. The frantic, pleading phone calls and emails she sent in the days following the dinner went unanswered. On the final day of the 30-day notice period, she was forced to oversee a moving crew packing up her dream office in the Argent Tower. The showpiece space she had boasted about was stripped bare, the ghost of her ambition hanging in the empty rooms. Her business, so dependent on the Thorne name and its associated prestige, crumbled within months. Clients canceled contracts, and her staff resigned. The woman who had accused her husband of having a hobby now had nothing at all. Marcus Thorne's fate was a slower, more public bleed. He refused to accept the new lease terms out of pride, declaring he would move his entire company before paying a cent to Ethan. But moving a global headquarters was a logistical and financial nightmare. Breaking the 20-year lease he had so proudly signed incurred catastrophic penalties, which Ethan's legal team, led by the ever-efficient Mr. Chen, enforced to the letter. Thorne Industries stock plummeted. The board of directors, once cowed by Marcus's aggressive leadership, grew restless. After a disastrous quarterly report, they called an emergency meeting. In a final, brutal irony, Marcus Thorne was forced into early retirement from the company he had built, ousted by the very people he had once dominated. The most surprising development came from Eleanor. A week after the dinner, Ethan received a handwritten letter from her. It was not a plea for him to reconsider or an excuse for her behavior. It was a raw, painful, and honest apology. She wrote that for years she had been a passenger in her own life, just as Amelia had accused him of being. She had surrendered her voice and her conscience to Marcus's overwhelming personality and the comfort that his wealth provided. Seeing the quiet strength he had hidden for so long had forced her to look at her own quiet weakness. She didn't ask for his forgiveness, only to say that she was leaving Marcus and that she intended to spend the rest of her life trying to become a person of substance, not just of status. It was a small, flickering candle of redemption in the darkness of the Thorne family's collapse. Ethan read the letter in his real office, the one with the panoramic view of the city. He looked out at the Argent Tower, which now stood as a silent monument to the battle he had won. He felt no triumph, only a deep, resonant quiet. He had not set out to destroy them. He had only set out to defend his own dignity. Their destruction was a byproduct of their own character flaws. He had simply held up a mirror, and they had shattered against their own reflection. One afternoon, months later, Mr. Chen came to his office to finalize the last of the legal paperwork. The divorce was final. The Thorne Industries lease had been settled. The Argent Tower was now almost fully leased, at market rates, to new tenants. "It is all done, Mr. Croft," Mr. Chen said, placing a final document on the desk. "You are a free man, and a very wealthy one." Ethan looked at the document, then back out the window. "The wealth was never the point, David," he said quietly. "It was just a tool. The point was to be able to build things without having to ask for permission." Mr. Chen nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. "And what will you build now?" Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He turned to a large drafting table in the corner of the office. On it were the blueprints for his next project. It wasn't a skyscraper or a luxury condominium. It was the design for a new, state-of-the-art public library to be built in the heart of the city's most underserved neighborhood. He was funding the entire project himself, anonymously, through a new foundation he had created. "I'm going to build a library," he said. It was a place for quiet strength, a place where value was measured not in dollars, but in knowledge and dignity. It was a space where anyone, no matter their station in life, could build their own world. It was, in its own way, a home. And so, the story comes to a close. Ethan Croft, the man who was told he'd be homeless, found his home not in a house or an apartment, but in his own integrity. He learned that true strength isn't about how loudly you shout, but about the foundations you quietly build. He reclaimed his life not through revenge, but through a simple, powerful act of self-respect. He showed the world, and himself, that a person's worth is not determined by the judgment of others, but by the quiet truth of their own character. What do you think? Is this a story of revenge, or is it a story of justice? Sometimes the line between them is thin, but I believe it's defined by what comes after. Revenge seeks to diminish others, while justice seeks to restore balance. Ethan didn't become a tyrant like Marcus. He became a builder, a creator, using his power not to dominate, but to contribute. He won the war, and instead of salting the earth of his enemies, he chose to plant a garden for everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope it gave you that satisfying feeling of seeing arrogance get its comeuppance and seeing dignity win the day. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Every click helps us bring more stories like this to you. Until next time, remember that your value is inherent. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Be well and be true to yourself.